because let's talk first of all about the Neil O'Brien situation, because Neil O'Brien was, I think, pretty roundly criticised, I would say, towards the end of last year for being quite as outspoken as he was. He gave interviews to newspapers slagging off journalists, including Julie Hartley-Brewer, for questioning the government's narrative. He was described as Matt Hancock's house elf by some, but he's obviously got what he wanted.
Well, the thing that's fascinating is that they feel that they've had to appoint somebody to explain what levelling up is.
Yes.
A phrase that we've been listening to for well over a year, and we now discover it was nothing more than jargon and a slogan, and so they've got to give somebody a top job to untangle it and make it real. The fact that it's Neil O'Brien, who, as you note, was somebody who certainly anyone who builds a website that says he's going to list people who he considers to have broken some golden rule on how or what you should say about the lockdown, doesn't exactly inspire me with confidence. But another thing that doesn't inspire me with confidence is his main job has been to run a think tank and to be an advisor to George Osborne and Theresa May. This is hardly a man of the people who has got his finger on the pulse of what levelling up might be.
Well, exactly right. And also, this idea of COVID denial, which he more or less kind of coined, is a ludicrous statement and a ludicrous phrase, which was picked up by an awful lot of other people since then. And it's quite offensive, actually.
I think it really is. I mean, look, we know that in relation to those people who have been sceptical or questioning of some aspects of the lockdown, that there are fringe groups who will say it's just like the flu, it doesn't exist, it's a conspiracy from, Bill Gates or what have you. This is a tiny minority of people. The majority of people who've dared to ask any questions about lockdown policies have been quite reasonably trying to understand the logic often lacking from some of the government policies. And, Talk Radio has been one of the stations that's actually ask some of those awkward questions. And that has to be important when legislation has been passed that has had detrimental impact on the livelihoods and lives of so many people, that you should just say, is this necessary? If you're told data, not dates, you should be allowed to ask the question, well, the data's changed, why haven't the dates changed?
Well,
this is not about being in any way part of a kind of anti-science brigade or lunatics, conspiracy mongers. And in fact, if anything fuels conspiracy thinking, it's when MPs create lists and, have a kind of centralised, little black book, which calls people a COVID denier should you ask a question of government policy.
Exactly right. And also, I mean, the idea that, Julia Hartley-Brewer had Liz Truss on this morning, and she said, well, we have to be so cautious in case we go backwards and we do things too quickly. And Julia said, well, how could we go backwards? The level of COVID now in this country is so small. The numbers of people getting it are continually falling. One person was registered as dying, and I know that it was a bank holiday yesterday, so for some reason they can't count as well on a bank holiday or a weekend as they do during the week. But still, we're into single figures. And if that's not different from where we were in January, where as many as 1,000 people were dying a day, then what's the point?
Well, listen, let's relate it to the whole question of levelling up, which is what Neil O'Brien has been asked to look at. When Julia was talking to Liz Truss earlier, Liz Truss is somebody who can be credited, and rightly credited, with having had a really dynamic impact in terms of trade agreements and really the whole notion of, building back, post-Brexit Britain, post-COVID, post-lockdown Britain, with a real sense of forward movement, and what we need is, economic development and all the rest of it. That would be an essential requirement for any levelling up. Yet the government say, it's okay to dilly-dally and drag out this lockdown, even despite the fact that so many people will suffer as a consequence. I don't know what they think levelling up is. I was in Bolton at the weekend, as they were, the good campaigners of Bolton that I was with were pointing out that roads have been closed because of cycle lanes, that the shopping centre is practically sort of empty because you can't get in and out, and that ordinary businesses are not able to properly function because of lockdown restrictions. And it might seem okay for politicians to say, oh, well, why are you complaining? We've got a roadmap. It's only a matter of weeks. But every single day that these restrictions are in place holds back the idea, or, holds back for businesses, but not just businesses, for workers, for all of us, the sense of what we need to do, which is have a really energetic building up of, the productivity, new jobs, all of the things. And we're going to need to give people confidence, aren't we? You can't just say to everyone, right, back to normal, everyone. That requires real enthusiasm for a new period post-COVID. And what does the government say? What does Liz Truss say? Oh, we have to be very, very careful. Very, very cautious. Well, I'm amazed she's got any trade deals if that's her approach.
Well, exactly right, because this idea that they seem to have got themselves into, which is, well, we have to try and, future-proof this and future-proof that. Well, I don't seem to remember any future-proofing that any government ever did before. You deal with things as they come at you. You don't try and make it so safe for everybody to go out that you've outlawed, people driving in cars or trains running or planes flying. But you sometimes wonder if that's what they're heading for, because you kind of go, well, it's more like levelling down all of this. Nobody's like me. I mean, look at yesterday, people had to shut the pubs because it was so horrible, the weather, that they literally couldn't entertain anybody. And that's more money down the drain for them.
Exactly, but I also heard you interviewing somebody about the testing regime.
Yeah.
The fact that these things are going to slow down productivity, not increase them. And, any kind of sense that, any historic sense that we all understand of a country that's going to really forge ahead and be able to create new jobs and create new opportunities for young people, things that are absolutely necessary at the moment. What do we associate with that kind of entrepreneurial spirit? That you have to take some risks. I mean, the last thing you want is a kind of risk-averse climate. Now, we've had a pandemic. We understand that precautionary ideas have set in. But what you do now to reverse that, it seems to me, is to absolutely fill people with the confidence and a bit of what we want to say to people is we need a bit of courage now. We need to go out there and have a complete transformation of the society because, I was shocked, but why am I shocked? I don't even know why. But when the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, just a month ago or something, the numbers said that the numbers living in destitution has doubled in a single year from, 200,000 to over 400,000. This is destitution. This isn't just... And then I'm thinking, God, that's terrible. And I think, well, it's no wonder. Not everybody's had furlough. Even the people on furlough have effectively had a 20% pay cut. Right. What it means is that people are really struggling. And if we're going to level up in any way at all, if you're going to take those red wall seats seriously or blue wall or whatever you want to call them, what needs to happen is that we need to have a sense of dynamism. And that requires energy, activity, huge schemes that are going to build infrastructure and so on. What you don't need is to be told to be careful, go slowly, don't do anything on the one hand. And the only dynamism I see coming out of government at the moment is around green issues. So there's a huge amount of dynamism from local councils introducing low traffic neighbourhoods, closing off roads, stopping local people from driving around and getting on with their lives. Huge amount of dynamism around cycle lanes. What there isn't any dynamism around is actually allowing ordinary economic productive activity to carry on.
And with very few exceptions, unfortunately most MPs don't really understand the real world, do they? Particularly the ones that are based in London, particularly the ones that are in the cabinet, I suspect, who've never been probably to Bolton in their lives or never seen a shopping centre that's not really very easily accessible or, never sat outside a pub in Skipton in Yorkshire, and got hailed on. They don't know what real life is actually like. And they've all had plenty of money during this pandemic. They've all been paid 100% of their wages. They've all been paid their expenses. They're all living very nicely. Thank you very much indeed. And I think they could do with a bit of a short, sharp shock, to be honest.
Well, I do. I would at least like to see, rather than putting Neil O'Brien in place, what I'd at least like to have seen was a gathering of all of the new Tory MPs, if you want. It's a Tory government, so they're bound to do it that way. The new Tory MPs from those seats that they didn't expect to win in the last election, but did so on the back of Brexit. Those red woolsies, have a gathering of them and just get people, them to organise local town hall meetings, go around the country. Of course, you're not allowed to have any meetings, are you? But this is what they should be doing. Town hall meetings in every single place where they say they're going to level up and have a conversation. And you don't have to, I'm not suggesting that, just because, Jim from Blackburn says we should do this, that the government does it. But they could do with talking to people, listening to them. What they're doing is they're going by opinion polling. They've got no direct relationship with the ordinary people of this country. They can't be those people. They're part of the elite. I mean, look, I'm in the House of Lords. I'm on the radio all the time. I know that I myself, I can't pretend I'm living that life. But what you can do is be open to those conversations. But guess what they've done? And this is why, going back to Neil O'Brien, those people in local areas who said, why aren't we opening up earlier? The good people of Salford who say, for God's sake, this is too slow. What's happening to our hospitality industry? They say to them, oh, you're a COVID denier who just wants to get to the pub. I mean, they've got no idea. And by the way, just on the getting to the pub bit, apart from the fact there is nothing illegal with having a good time at the pub.
No, not yet, anyway.
No, exactly. But it's also the case that if you, for example, are somebody who's been working on the bins throughout this pandemic, right, you've had to, a lot of the frontline workers at Tesco's, in care homes and all the rest of it, their life is reduced to just working and then having had no social life at all. The point about going to the pub is not just that you have a drink and good time, of which there's nothing wrong, but it's also where you create community.
Yes.
It's where you actually go and talk to your mates, talk about the issues in the world, and actually are able to relax from working bloody hard. And so what I find so frustrating is that they kind of demonise and stigmatise ordinary people who want things to be normal, who want to have the lives they had. They want their freedoms, which are theirs by right. And yet they are the ones that are demonised as somehow being ignorant, anti-sage, not listening to the experts. And that's why it just seems so ironic that the person put in charge of levelling up was one of the main cheerleaders for that kind of approach of dismissing any concerns at all about our freedoms and writing people off as ignorant.
Yeah, and I mean, he's the least sort of sympathetic character that I can think of in Westminster, but that's enough about him. Because the other thing, of course, that's happened, Claire, is the other infringements on our freedoms has been the way the police have dealt with some people and some things over the course of the last year. And the most recent example of that we saw at the weekend up in Uxbridge, where a preacher was reading passages from the Bible. As far as I know, I haven't heard exactly what he said. He was accused of some kind of hate speech because he was talking about marriage being between a man and a woman, and he was arrested.
Yeah, I mean, this was a really shocking example of what we might well be frightened about at the moment. He's a street preacher. We've all heard them before. Yeah. Not to my taste, and quoting the Bible and interpreting it literally is certainly something that we might mock, and we should be free to mock it.
Yes.
Should we think it's a nonsense idea? But he was a 71-year-old man who's been a preacher for 35 years, and he was speaking to his conscience. And the part in the Bible that he read out was indeed about marriage should be between a man and a woman, which is in the Bible indeed. And this, of course, was then interpreted by some passers-by as being homophobic and a hate crime. Now, unless you're going to ban the Bible and make it illegal in this country, actually, the Bible is full of things that now would be interpreted as hate crimes. I'm amazed somebody hasn't tried to cancel it. But the way that the police dealt with this gentleman was, rather than telling the people who said, I'm offended by him, telling them, well, get a life, don't worry about it. Do you know what I mean?
Don't stand and listen to it then.
Yeah, he's a 71-year-old, Bible thumper, go away.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
They've been there for a long time. They said, oh, there might be an incident that we have to investigate. And they basically effectively pulled him off his made-up pulpit, standing on a box or whatever, and dragged him off. He was kept overnight for 21 hours, as I understand it. Now, it looks like they're not going to charge him, but what a humiliation, what a horribly frightening thing. And I think that if you're an atheist or you're religious in this country, you have to defend religious freedom and conscience. You have to allow people to say things that you find offensive. But religious freedom was one of the very first in the Enlightenment tradition that people realised that what freedom would mean, that you would allow people with mad religious views, wacky religious views that you didn't agree with, if that's your take, or that it's the word of God, if that's your take. But you would allow that. You would tolerate it. Religious tolerance is hugely important.
Well, tolerance of all kinds. I mean, it's a bit like arresting that bloke that used to walk up and down Oxford Street with the sandwich board on, saying the end is nigh. You know,
I mean, the end is nigh is now Neil O'Brien's slogan, isn't it? I mean, actually, these days that's become fashionable.
Yes.
But on the religious thing, I mean, on the other hand, I was slightly anxious about the fact that too many people, certainly on social media, in my interactions, sort of immediately said, oh, the reason he's been arrested is because one of the police officers is a Muslim. This is, an attack by Muslims on Christian. And you think, God, that's a horrible bit about the culture war, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's actually got nothing to do with it. This is a well and truly informed, not by anything to do with Islam, because, by the way, those people who espouse Islam might well be done on the same hate crime argument when it comes to things like gay rights and so on. So I think we have to be careful about over-interpreting it. What really worries me is that the police, in this sense, there's a kind of secular religion, which is the secular religion is thou shalt not offend. And anyone who does is treated as a heretic, as a blasphemer, and dragged away. And I think that's a very dangerous situation. The police themselves should just instinctively use their judgment. And the fact that their instinctive judgment is always to arrest and to actually say you can't say that is a real change, I think, from the way that we've understood policing historically.
And it might be that the police are in a difficult position because, they're constantly getting told one thing one weekend and another thing another weekend, And now that we've been told by Priti Patel that the hate incidents are now going to be done away with in terms of reporting them, but hate crime is still there. I mean, I haven't yet found anyone who can define it for me as to where an incident stops and a crime begins. And clearly they are confused. But what I think we shouldn't have, as you just said, is kind of the tail wagging the dog. It shouldn't be people who think that somebody's saying something offensive telling the police to go and arrest them.
Yeah, I mean, we have to have a major discussion about this. I was absolutely delighted that Priti Patel did announce that she was going to get rid of this insidious way of recording non-hate crime incidents, because it meant that even if you'd not committed a crime, if you wanted to get a job at some stage, the police had you on their database and you could be checked out. So you, as getting a job as a youth worker, and suddenly the person looking on the reference says that you were done for a non-hate crime incident. They only have to see the word hate crime and they're immediately just not going to take you on. Right. So this is a terrible injustice. And if Priti Patel is true to her word and gets rid of it, great. But the greater problem is, as you've pointed out, that hate crimes themselves are so often subjective. I mean, what is a hate crime? And it effectively is an entirely subjective way. If you look at the legislation, it actually says that a third party can report a hate crime. Right. It can be in the perception of anyone to say, I understood that as a hate crime, and then the police have to take it seriously. So I agree with you, that the police are put in an awkward position because they're trying to, as it were, carry out the law, and the law says that hate crimes are an issue and so on and so forth. But there was something about there was something, if you saw that video, about the zealousness with which they did it and the insensitivity. And I do think at all times police have to use their judgment as to how they act. And I think the inconsistency of the policing during the last year has been shocking for people. And we're all familiar with the arguments now. But, some demonstrations are treated as more dangerous than others, let's say, not because of any objective danger, but because of the ideas being put forward. So a demonstration, on one issue, the police appear to be quite meek in terms of their intervention. A demonstration, particularly at those who went on the anti-lockdown demonstrations, were pretty roughly manhandled and so on. So I think that what we've got here is a police that people have started to distrust. I mean, I saw somebody a very respectable conservative type person who said on social media over the weekend, I'm getting to the point where I hate the police. Yeah. And I was always somebody who trusted them absolutely. Now, I do think that policing by consent is under extreme pressure, and hate crimes in particular are one of the issues which I think has done that. And at the same time, if you call the police for what we consider to be crimes,
Proper crime.
break-ins,
Yeah.
proper crimes, as they say, you can be treated, like it's like they're too busy. Do you know what I mean? There's no one around. And there is, on a more serious note, genuinely this horrible outbreak again of an increased number of young people stabbing each other, particularly in London.
Yeah.
Really unpleasant. So, you just think, why have you got 3 or 4 guys arresting women, led by a policewoman actually, in Uxbridge, arresting a street preacher whose crime is words, whose crime is ideas? This is not, in my view, a crime. This goes far too close to hate crime. I mean, it goes far too close to the thought crimes that George Orwell talked about. It's very dangerous.
No, I think you're absolutely right.